Okay. Carry on. Right. Wasn't expecting this kind of a turnout, guys. I know some of you have actually seen this talk for the second time, slightly tweaked, but it's not going to be far from the other times I've actually held this talk. But essentially, it started out as a tester-focused talk as well. I went to a Eurostar software testing conference talk in Copenhagen. They did a talk very similar to this. I have butchered it and heavily plagiarised it, but kind of tried my best to make it my own at the same time as well. So it's essentially, as you might have seen from the description, I found it quite a daunting prospect at the beginning to be able to, especially retroactively, make our website a more accessible place. So after playing around with some accessibility thoughts and trying to raise a few tickets and trying to get a little bit of awareness on that front, and seeing this talk at Eurostar, I decided that's actually a great, nice 10-point breakdown that I can take back to HX, share with them, and hopefully can knock down some of those walls that make things just a little bit more, a little bit daunting about trying to incorporate this perception, as it were, into our day-to-day work. And hopefully that's what this is going to achieve. So, starts off hopefully not too much of a negative note, but we don't do much of this, or at least, to be fair, we didn't. 6 months ago at the last conference day, Jess and her team held a talk called We Have a Design Team, I believe it's called, and in that there was a nice part which was focused on accessibility, which was great. And so I suddenly just thought, excellent, so it's not this bad anymore, we actually have a focus. Hey Jess. So it was a great way of thinking. We actually now have a core focus with it, which means to clearly have buy-in from the people that have the power to make the decisions here as well. And it's kind of like, no one can argue the point that making something more accessible is going to just completely improve it on not just for those people, but for people in general. So that was good news that we've actually got a design team focused on this point. We all like cold hard numbers, so I just thought I'd throw some stats your way as well to get some idea and perspective of the impact that the improvement of accessibility can actually have. So sorry to the guys to the right of me who may or may not be able to see the TV screen. Of the 66 million people in the UK, 1 in 5 live with some form of disability that can make using the web difficult. That's 13 million people. 13 million people in the UK alone that can suffer from sight-related issues, hearing loss, mobility problems, learning difficulties, all of which can make it a struggle to just use the web, utilise the web that we all do. There's a book called A Web for Everyone by Whitney Quisenberry, and in it she quotes that disability is a conflict between someone's functional capability and the world that we have constructed for them. So it's the product that creates the barrier, not the person. For example, steps leading up to the front door of a building are infinitely more difficult to navigate for someone who's dependent on a wheelchair than, say, a ramp. We've created that barrier for that person. So 13 million people potentially affected by accessibility issues online. Of those 13 million, 1 in 4 were, when the study was carried out, were open to the fact that they had never used the internet. That makes 3.3 million people that had never used the internet. My wife pointed out that as a figure, it sounds big, but we don't have a great deal of context. It's just a random large number thrown at us. So, fun fact, she pointed out that's actually higher than the population of Wales. People that have just never used the internet before. There's a number of reasons. There's expense, there's the cost of a broadband subscription, there is the need for assistive technologies like braille readers, screen readers, magnifiers, motion eye trackers, voice recognition software, all kinds of things that cost. And finally, there's also just the simple fact that people in this situation have a lack of awareness, lack of skills and training, and they're left into a situation where they can simply feel that the web just isn't for them. It's not built for them, which, as we all know, working in web and in a company that is tech-based, that's just simply not the case, and it shouldn't be the case. So I'm going to get into the top 10 tips now. First one of which is know your users. I just had the pleasure of going to Nikki's talk, and Nikki ended on a really excellent note, which resounded with me, which was, who are we shipping for? And it's hard to get past our own personal biases in the sense to get our mind into the space of outside of our own social and work contexts and outside of our own physical capabilities. The key I found is just remembering to do it, remembering to consider that, you know, grey on grey may look neat, may look modern as far as text on, like grey text on a grey background. It can look very, very clean and tidy and up to date, but that could play havoc with anyone with any kind of colour blindness or sight loss or anything like that. So it might look great, but from our perspective, but if we just take the time to consider someone, in that example, with sight issues, suddenly you realise that could actually be a nightmare. This to them is a page that they cannot utilise or read at all. So knowing your users is a tricky one, but the key is just remembering to do it, include it in your considerations as and when possible. Number 2, use tools. Every task is made easier by using a tool that's fit for purpose. There are so many free plugins and extensions and bits of software that we can use on our Macs when drawing up mock-ups, having creative discussions, and just testing, essentially, the website that will help us raise accessibility issues, whether it's the cascading, like staggering of headers, or the colour contrast of certain texts to alternative texts against imagery that need to be there for screen reader purposes. It's all there to help us out. Macs, in fact, have a really great screen reader software called VoiceOver. If any of you guys haven't used it, I'd encourage you to have a little play. Gives you a good insight as to how tricky it can be just to navigate a page using the keyboard only without any sight. I've tried it a number of times and it's consistently difficult. There's also a great extension that was used recently that I was introduced to called Funkify, which helps simulate what the experience of web use could be with people with various disabilities, whether it's physical disability or condition like Parkinson's or sight issues, things like that. It's a very interesting Chrome extension. I'd recommend you try it out when you get 5-10 minutes. Number 3, read the page. Simply read the page. Quick trick is just keep things short. Use plain and simple language. Don't overwhelm our users with blocks of text. Obviously, this is a great consideration for anyone in web, but also our content team as well, and any other discipline that just views our page and thinks, if you immediately think that there's an awful lot of information that this page is trying to throw at me there's an increased chance that anyone with any kind of learning difficulty or dyslexia or Asperger's syndrome, it's a great opportunity to kind of refine that down, use lists, bullet point the core bits of information, make it bite-sized, make it digestible. But I think, generally speaking, HX are quite good at refining the amount of information we do give to our customers, but it's always something that I think is worth consistently reviewing. So that's something else I wanted to kind of include on this top 10 as well. Number 4, I've mentioned screen readers already, but unplug your mouse. Just how easy is it to navigate your page using the keyboard only? Does that navigation actually make sense? Does it flow correctly? Does it flow as you'd expect? This can be subjective, as a lot of design things are. But ultimately, if you have trouble navigating with a keyboard, then anyone with mobility issues or who is screen reader dependent, they're going to have a hell of a time just trying to get from A to B or trying to complete the task they've come here to complete. So this might make it easy for them. Number 5, zoom in. We're supposed to, in accordance to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, for text specifically, you're supposed to be able to zoom into 200 times the standard zoom size or standard set before things become unreadable or unusable, unbreakable. And according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, this is potentially going to be, for text only, increased to 400% at some point, maybe for the higher tiers of compliance to the guidelines. But again, we need to make sure that our pages can zoom in without breaking to quite a high degree. Number 6, quite simply check your links. Not obviously just that they direct off to the correct places, but that the links themselves have purpose. The fact that they sit within the page clearly. Don't use the words click here for your link. Don't use long URLs. Not that I've seen that we ever do, but you can imagine seeing a long URL as an actual link and wondering where the hell this goes off to. It's just another kind of like do and don't kind of pitfall we can fall into. But the purpose of each link needs to be able to be determined from the link text alone. The guidelines state that that's the case, except where the purpose of the link would be ambiguous to users in general. So that interpret that as you will, but as far as I'm concerned, that says it's okay to be confusing, but it's confusing for everyone. Maybe I misinterpreted, I don't know. But check your links, make sure they have purpose, make sure they fit. Alternative text or alt text. This is quite a hot topic for accessibility. Most of us would probably understand what alt text is, but it's, for example, you have a picture on your website of a cute cat. There's an alt text behind the element that says cute cat. There's a great article that OB shared in the accessibility channel recently, actually, which I read a couple of weeks ago, which excellent, really interesting read. And I can, if you can't find it in there, I'll forward it to you. And it's from a web developer who actually has sight issues, and he's dependent on a screen reader to actually navigate and code and do everything he needs to do as a pro. And he wrote this article, so it's from a great source, and it's got great content full of do's and don'ts and easy pitfalls and things like that that we can fall into when including alternative texts. I'll take a couple of bits and pieces out of his article and share it with you now. But basically, doesn't need to be said, but keep them short and concise. Users don't need to get bogged down in long, drawn-out descriptions from their screen reader, because that can become incredibly tedious, as I'm sure you can imagine. Use context from the site, so you don't need to over-explain where it's not necessary. They probably know why they're on the site, they know the purpose the site serves, so make the alternative text reflect that as well. And also, another key one, which is something I did not know until I read this, but don't start the description or the alt text with the words image of, because the screen readers are intelligent enough to know that it's an image, so it'll state image of a cute cat. Just unnecessary, so just those little tricks worth keeping in mind. In some cases, alternative texts are okay to skip as well. For example, when they are when the image is already captioned, for example, or if it already has a description attached to the image. If the image is part of a link, that's okay, because there's context there that the user knows that the screen reader will relay that they're going to be taken off to another page. And if the image is purely decorative and doesn't really add purpose to the page itself, it's okay to skip alternative text. Number 8, forms. We have tons of forms throughout our website. We want to make sure that we can navigate those forms using just a keyboard, tab through them simply and cleanly. Do they make sense? Likewise with validation errors, if we do skip a particular field in a form, do we spell that out to the customer if they try and submit that information? Or is it clear that it's mandatory? Do those validation errors actually meet a content accessibility guideline minimum standard of not just a different colour for validation errors, but a different format of text as well? Is it underlined? Can we use iconography to help bring that to people's attention? Can we anchor the page to make sure that they know exactly where that error is coming from? Lots of things we can do with forms to make sure that because they're crucial to our business, obviously, with payment, with searches. So making sure our forms work is absolutely detrimental. Number 9, automate where we can. Again, I'm going to refer back to something that Obi put in the accessibility Slack channel, and it's that we're unable to automate quite a lot of accessibility, but there are definitely things we can cover. Going back a couple of slides, alternative text is one of them. We can write our test scripts to check that alternative texts are actually present. It can't tell us whether those are actually good or not, but it can certainly tell us whether they exist. For example, so there are some other pitfalls with alternative texts where some people put actually links to addresses or credits to the photographer, things like that, and obviously that's just not useful to anyone trying to navigate the page. So those are the kinds of things that automation can't fix for us, so we still need to be quite vigilant and use manual testing in that front, or manual conversation, any kind of checking. So, but there are places we can automate. I haven't done a great deal of research into this field, but it's something that can be made infinitely easier if we leave the machine to do all the boring stuff. Lastly, point 10, another tricky one, but testing with real users. I'm going to go back to that A Web for Everyone book that I referenced earlier. where they say that we can apply as many good principles as we can to the website ourselves, which is fine. But unless we put our site in front of real users who access our technology in different ways, we'll never truly know whether our site works for them. Our best intention, we can make as much groundwork for accessibility, robustness as we can, but we really do need to get in front of real users. And those kind of focus groups is something that I think is something we could probably work on more. It's not the easiest thing to arrange, but I think it's we'll get much more consistent and valuable answers if those kinds of things take place. The web content accessibility guidelines are a horrific read, like truly awful. So don't read it at all. I've taken some bits and pieces out of it, and I think the 4 core principles, POUR, are probably some of the more valuable bits you can take as just a general kind of consensus, something to keep in mind when we're building our pages or including features. P being perceivable. Is the page perceivable? Is everything in place? Is it visible? Does the page actually have purpose? Is the page operable? Can you navigate without the mouse? Does that navigation actually make sense? Does it operate? Is the page understandable? Are you using any unnecessary jargon? Is it too wordy? Are you using friendly language? Too much information? Refine it down if so. And is it robust? Does it work on all browsers? Does it work on devices? Can you reduce the window size without it breaking? Can you zoom in and zoom out without it breaking? So they're the 4 core principles from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now you don't need to read them, so good for you guys. So to sum up, know your users. Use tools, read, unplug your mouse, zoom in, check your links, check your alternative texts, check your forms, automate where possible, and finally, use real users. It's a key thing that I've obviously found, and I think any person who's remotely interested in design or involved in design can agree. And I think, again, Nikki, I think you made this point in your talk as well, is that baking these things in early, having the discussions, the creative discussions early, and getting the mock-ups drawn up early, and having these considerations take place at that point in the creative process is key, because retrospectively fitting these changes into an already established page or site is incredibly difficult from what I understand. Getting the buy-in, finding the time, the resource, and learning how to recode things. So that would be my main takeaway, is bake it in early, have the conversations as soon as you can regarding new pages, new features, and everything else. That's it from me. I think we've got a little bit of time for some questions, if there are any. I'm not going to guarantee any answers. Nick Lowe, Startup, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew Hart. Is it easy to track how many users on a page are using tools to support a disability?
Is it easy to track? Sorry, I just want to repeat for anyone who may or may not be on the call. Got people on the call?
I can't tell.
You can't tell. That's fine. Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, repeat that one, Nick, for me, just so I've got it clear.
Is it
easy to track? Yeah.
The number of users that access a web page using some form of aid for a disability?
Excellent question. I do not have the answer. It's something I'd actually like to find out.
I'll answer it. No.
For it.
Is the answer. And actually, when you talk to some of the groups and stuff, they don't want to be tracked.
Okay.
And that's kind of the key part of it. They want to use the website as it was intended to be used, not because the thing is, if you build something with tracking, people will provide alternative websites like, oh, they're using screen reader, so we'll do a separate screen reader website for them. So that I actually use the website as a human being and not be singled out like that. So people purposely not put those kind of tracking things in there, which is kind of good.
Cheers, Jodie. For anyone who didn't catch that, Jodie's response was simply no. Going into a little bit more detail, it's mainly because they don't want to be singled out in the sense of they want to use the page as it was originally intended, not as someone who actually requires additional support in utilising that page. So no, it's not easy to track people that utilise the technology in different ways to how it was essentially intended. Yeah, cheers, Jodie. Nice one. Thanks for having my back.
In terms of navigating without a mouse,
I think a bunch of websites use different techniques. Like I think on YouTube you can press the question mark key and you get like a keyboard shortcut listing of like all the keys you can press. I think on Google you can tab to the results and use the arrow keys to come down. Is there like a recommended like this is how you're supposed to do that, or is it free game?
To my knowledge, again, no, there's not a kind of a standard. There's, for example, if you trigger VoiceOver on your Mac, the inbuilt screen reader, tabbing and I think it's Command or Shift and using the cursor keys is the more effective way of navigating through a page. But simply just unplugging the mouse and saying, right, I'm going to start navigating, like say using Chrome, I don't think there's a standardized way. Again, anyone from the design team who might know a bit more about that?
There's a way of, one of the biggest issues you've got when you're tabbing through is if you're hitting the page, you have to tab through the whole navigation every time you visit a page. So if I clicked on Airport Hotels, for example, let's tab through Airport Hotels, lounges, blah, blah, all that. So one of the techniques to use is on the first tab, have a hidden thing that comes on that says skip navigation or go straight to content. And that's the first thing they can click, and then it goes straight down to the content page and allows them to read the page, rather than having to go through the whole. Well, if you look at the holiday extras top navigation section, there's a hell of a ton of links there that they have to navigate through. So that's always a good technique that's recommended to do. But there is no standards.
No. Another question? Yeah.
A lot of the images and kind of graphics that we have on the website have text on them. Do screen readers, can they do anything with that, or is it just simply an image to a screen reader? Can they read text on it?
I think no. Screen readers, I don't think are intelligent enough to actually be able to interpret text on which if it's an image of text. But I think as long as that text is actually reflected in the alternative text on the component, I think that's fine. I'm not sure if there's anything I should really need to do, because that's exactly what the screen reader will pick up on when navigating through the page and focusing on that element. I think as long as the alternative text states that and has that purpose, I think it'll pick up.
And the problem is when we have galleries of like 15 images and none of them will have alternative text on them, so I think that's...
Yes. Yeah, could, again, it's a pitfall that we're falling into if in those cases, quite right. I'm not sure where that really sits when we've had scrolling imagery in those galleries as well for our products. So I'm not sure how screen readers interact with those like constantly moving components actually. So there'd be another question for me to ask the design team or the accessibility specialist, shall we say. Yeah, any other questions at all? Hey Jess.
Hi. I just wondered if the testers or QAs at short breaks, if you had like a list of things that are accessibility focused that you would check or make sure that you cover, or an engineer covers if it's a dev QA ticket. Is there something like standardised or formalised that you've started implementing or use?
There is nothing that I've put together myself specifically, but the tools like the Totally plugin, which is a Chrome extension that you should chuck and create if you're interested in having a little look, and the Wave extension as well. They make life so much easier for you by singling out these things. They almost provide you that list of things to look out for, and they'll flag up those little errors when it thinks there is something out of place accessibility-wise against the standards from the guidelines. So what I would do is recommend having a look at that. There's many things, for example, we have so many partner sites where the brand is dictated to us that we can't actually change that. We can't change font color or their brand logo or anything like that because it's not our place. As soon as with our own brands, fine, we have some leeway there. But there's often these things you'll pick up and you can, these extensions will flag up so many things that I think, yeah, this needs to change. This contrast ratio of color to background, font color to background is completely out of whack. But because it's not our brand, we can't touch it. We can put a suggestion to them, great, and keep fighting the fight on that respect. But it's their established brand. It's not going to change anytime soon. All we can do is just say, by the way.
And is that formalised? So does everyone use that plugin? Does everyone use Totally? Or
I don't think so. I think this came about. I think I was back when UX UI was a pod in itself. Hi Jody. Yeah, and I think one of the guys in the UX UI team told me about it. Told me about both in the Totally and Wave, and I've personally been using them since. And I've told the other testers about them and many other members of the various disciplines in web, whether it's something utilised or not. I'm not entirely sure. But it does serve, to circle back around to your question, it does serve as a pretty decent checklist of things that would be easy fix. That's not such an easy fix, but I'll flag it up anyway. So it helps you isolate those things you can look out for. Yeah.
Totaly's been added to the pattern library, so any mock-ups and stuff in there
Yes, I
will
have seen,
automatically get added
yeah,
on.
I've seen that. I've
So-
demoed that to me.
We've done that already.
Sweet.
Cool.
Totaly's been added to the pattern library. Hey Nick. Not sure you're allowed a second
question.
question.
On our sites?
Second, I
Have
interrupted
you
you.
done any user testing on our sites?
I've done some screen reader testing, like keyboard navigation, with things like color, contrast ratio, things like that. That's normally kind of more of an instinctive thing. If I see that something doesn't look quite right.
Sorry, have we done any external user
Oh,
testing?
have we organised? Sorry for like getting focus groups in, and to my knowledge, no, I don't think we have. I honestly, not to my recollection in the years that I've been here. I know we've carried out focus groups and things like that, but not specific for accessibility.
Why not?
Exactly. Why not? I don't have that. It does take time to organise and things like that. I'll gladly help out if we could get buy-in to arrange something like that. Then great. But we need to have a bit of a key focus. Need to know what to put in front of them. There needs to be a bit of a plan before bringing people in. But I'm all for it. Absolutely. Good question, Nick. Any other questions at all? Thank you very much, guys. Cheers. Thanks for stopping by.